A video from mainland China has recently surfaced, showing an excavator knocking down tombstones and digging up graves in a cemetery. The person who posted the video claimed that this happened because the cemetery's lease had expired, and the owners hadn't renewed it, so the management simply dug up the graves. This incident has not yet been fully verified, but in recent years there has been a rise in reports about the skyrocketing costs of funerals and burial plots in China. Many people say that dying has become too expensive, making it a major social issue. There are also many disturbing real-life stories related to this problem. One person shared that while visiting a cemetery during the Qingming festival, during which people honor their dead, they saw several workers using shovels to dig up graves. They watched as urns containing ashes were removed and discarded to the side. The workers then moved on to the next grave, doing the same thing. There was already a pile of discarded urns nearby. Curious, the person asked the workers why they were digging up the urns. The response was that the families of these graves could no longer be contacted, and their management fees had been overdue for a long time. Since no one was paying, the cemetery treated them as unclaimed graves and cleared the space for resale. The person saying, "If we were just going to be thrown away eventually, why even bother with a burial?" Commentator Tang Jingyuan explained that in China, apart from some private burial plots in rural areas, urban residents can only be buried in public cemeteries. According to government regulations, the land in these cemeteries is owned by the state or a collective entity, meaning families cannot resell or transfer the plots. Because of this, cemetery prices are tightly controlled by the authorities. As land costs continue to rise, the price of burial plots has also skyrocketed. Most people who buy burial plots only have the right to use them, not ownership. There is also an additional one-time maintenance fee, which covers a maximum of 20 years. After that, if families want to keep using the plot, they must continue paying management fees, which fluctuate like housing prices. If they cannot afford it or simply don't want to keep paying for generations, the cemetery gives them a 3-month grace period. After that, the graves are treated as unclaimed, cleared, and resold. The soaring cost of burial plots has been a widely discussed issue. Reports indicate that in major cities, some burial plots are even more expensive than living spaces. In Shanghai's Songhe Cemetery, 1 square meter plot cost 763,000 yuan, several times more than the city's housing prices. A Shanghai resident, Mr. Wang, expressed his frustration. "People feel helpless. It's even more expensive than a house. Some plots are only 0.6 square meters, just enough for a tombstone, and the most expensive ones go for over 1,000,000 yuan. It's less than 1 square meter. What can ordinary people do? Many people have just given up. They'd rather scatter the ashes into the sea or the Huangpu River." Because the cemetery prices are so unaffordable, some residential areas have seen the emergence of so-called ash storage rooms, which has left many residents uneasy. One person uploaded photos online with the caption, "If there was a house like this in your neighborhood, wouldn't you be nervous? These rooms have completely sealed windows, blocking out all light. They don't look like normal homes, and that's because they're not meant for living. They're used to store urns. This is what people called an ash storage room. Does your neighborhood have one?" A few years ago, Miss Wang spent several years saving up to buy her first home. To get along with her neighbors, Miss Wang bought a lot of food, intending to share it with them. However, for several days, no matter when she knocked on the door next to hers, there was never a response. The property management told her that the unit had been registered and was not vacant. At night, she even thought she could hear sounds coming from inside. It wasn't until 6 months later, during Qingming Festival, that she saw a group of people gathered outside the unit, holding flowers and paper money as an effigy. Curious, she took a closer look and was shocked to see that all the windows had been sealed with bricks. It turned out the unit was actually being used as an ash storage room. In 2023, Mr. Li from Changsha, Hunan, moved to Qingdao, Shandong for work. He was on a tight budget and found an affordable rental in a neighborhood through an online platform. Although it was far from the city center, it had good transportation, and most importantly, the rent was much cheaper than in surrounding areas. When Mr. Li moved in, he noticed the security guard at the entrance gave him a strange look. After settling in, he opened the window for some fresh air and saw that the windows of 3 nearby units had been completely sealed with red bricks and cement, leaving no gaps at all. One day, while heading out, he overheard a security guard speaking into a walkie-talkie, saying, "Young people these days are really bold. They don't even flinch at living in a place filled with yin energy." Connecting this to the bricked-up windows and the unusually low rent, Mr. Lee felt uneasy. After walking around, he found that those units were actually ash storage rooms, and according to local customs, they couldn't be exposed to sunlight, hence the sealed windows. He barely lasted 2 days before moving out, saying the atmosphere in that place was just too unsettling. In another case, Mr. Wang, an AC installer in Tianjin's Binhai area, told reporters that he once encountered an ash storage unit while working in a residential complex near Tianjin port. The customer had offered to double the usual installation fee. The moment he stepped inside, he saw a table in the middle of the living room with an urn and various offerings on it. The windows hadn't been sealed yet, but were covered with white curtains, with a large white flower hanging in the center, giving the place the look of a mourning hall. Mr. Wang recalled that he was so startled he instinctively pulled his foot back before stepping inside. Seeing his reaction, the customer immediately doubled the installation fee again, and only then did he force himself to complete the job. Following Mr. Wang's description, reporters recently visited the complex. A cleaning worker pointed to one unit with white curtains and a large white flower, as well as another with tightly closed black curtains, saying these were the so-called ash storage rooms. They usually remained empty, except during Qingming Festival when people came to pay respects. The reporter counted over 10 such units in just 2 buildings near the main entrance. One Tianjin resident who purchased an ash storage unit for their family members' ashes said, "My family is financially well off, so we bought an ash storage room to store our loved ones' remains. Some of my friends, however, have had to place their relatives' ashes on remote hillsides, just piling up some stones around them. One way or another, we all have to find a place for our loved ones to rest." Investigators have found that most people choosing to store ashes in residential units live in major cities. In these cities, burial plots are extremely expensive, management fees are high, and the lease terms are short, making a traditional burial a costly decision. Ms. Zhao from Chaoyang District, Beijing, explained that even lower-quality burial sites in remote areas of the city cost over 100,000 yuan. Additionally, purchasing a plot only grants a 20-year usage period, after which families must continue paying management fees. She shared that she has already decided to buy a property in Chongli District, Jiangjiakou, Hebei Province. It cost about 250,000 yuan. The apartment is a reasonable size and comes with a 70-year ownership period. She plans to store her late relatives' ashes there and visit annually for memorials. Beyond the issue of overpriced burial plots and ash storage rooms, corruption in China's funeral industry has also raised serious concerns. Last year, reports surfaced about criminals stealing over 4,000 bodies from 4 crematoriums and selling them to a biotechnology company in Shanxi province. The bones were then processed into allograft transplant materials and sold to hospitals. With the total value of the case reaching 380 million yuan, China News Weekly also reported that at least 18 funeral home directors and cemetery administrators have been investigated this year. Commentator Xu Chen pointed out that while private companies provide funeral services in China, funeral homes themselves are state-owned institutions. These public facilities should be charging minimal fees, yet they have become part of a highly profitable industry, which he finds deeply troubling. He explained that such issues have existed for years, but only now, with increased awareness of rights and the widespread use of the internet, there are more cases being exposed. He stated, "Funerals mark the final journey of life, and making money from this industry should still respect basic ethics, social order, and traditions. However, the fact that funeral homes in China are involved in body trafficking shows that they have completely lost all moral restraint." Xu recalled when his mother passed away 13 years ago. He arranged her funeral at a state-run funeral home in China. The funeral home charged nearly 4,000 yuan just for placing a few flower arrangements around the coffin, which he found outrageous. Later, he was shocked when a restaurant worker at the funeral home directly asked his father for a red envelope, treating it as a customary fee. He said, "The chef was completely shameless. He went straight to my father and said, 'Since you've eaten a few meals here, you should give us a red envelope.' He even claimed that this was their local custom." Xu firmly believes that while he has already paid for the meals, this so-called tradition was not something passed down from the Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, or Qing dynasties. Instead, he sees it as a corrupt practice embedded with state institutions, where people have become so accustomed to it that they feel entitled to demand extra money. He also pointed out that in China, there have been frequent cases of babies being switched at birth in hospitals and cremated remains being mixed up at funeral homes. Concerns that he might receive the wrong ashes, he insisted on personally witnessing his mother's cremation from start to finish to ensure that he was taking home the right remains. Xu Chuan pointed out that in China, many unclaimed bodies remain unidentified, leading to widespread concern among families that they may not receive their loved ones' actual ashes. Due to this lack of trust, some funeral homes have started live streaming cremation processes in order to reassure families. Xu explained, in some of the larger funeral homes, if you request it, they will live stream the entire cremation process for you. It's actually quite sad because this is something that shouldn't have to be live streamed at all. But to make sure you feel at ease, they'll let you watch the whole process. They'll confirm with everyone, this is your elderly relative, correct? Once the family nods in agreement, they'll say, all right, now on the big screen you can see the body slowly entering cremation chamber number 3. In 45 minutes, the remains will be retrieved. Some places do this, but reality, it's something that should never have to be live streamed in the first place. Mr. Chen, a funeral industry professional from Taiwan, noted that while urban residents in China are more accepting of cremation, burial remains a strong tradition in rural areas. In 2023, the Chinese Communist Party issued its document number 1, calling for funeral reforms in rural areas. A few months later, in Liangfeng Village, Guizhou, local authorities caused outrage by secretly exhuming freshly buried bodies at night and forcibly cremating them. China's funeral home reform efforts can be traced back to 2012, when the government amended its funeral regulations to phase out burials and promote cremation. This led to widespread grave flattening campaigns across the country. One of the most infamous cases occurred in Zhoukou, Henan, where authorities claimed to have flattened over 2 million graves in 2012 to create 4,900 acres of farmland. At the time, the city's mayor, Yue Wenhai, earned the nickname the Grave Flattening Mayor. Then, in 2014, reports emerged from Anhui where 6 elderly residents ended their lives in protest on June 1st, just before the deadline for mandatory cremation. That same year, the CCP issued additional guidelines requiring party officials to set an example by choosing cremation and eco-friendly burials as part of the country's efforts toward spiritual and ecological civilization. More recently, Suizhou, Hubei announced that starting March 20, 2024, cremation would be mandatory across Suixian County, Guangshui County, and Zhengdu District, with all ashes required to be interred in public cemeteries. Many people online have voiced their opposition, arguing that ancestral graves are not just simple mounds of earth, but symbols of family heritage and social ties. Destroying them, they say, is equivalent to destroying one of the most fundamental aspects of Chinese culture. One commenter wrote, "The CCP's funeral reform sounds nice on the surface, calling it part of spiritual and ecological civilization. But in reality, it's just another continuation of the Four Olds destruction campaign from the early years of the regime. It's actually an attack on traditional Chinese culture and family values." He went on to say that the CCP's actions since seizing power have shown blatant disrespect towards Chinese ancestors. He said, during the Cultural Revolution, countless tombs of historical figures and revered individuals were desecrated, their remains destroyed and humiliated, and these are just a few examples. 1. The main hall of Emperor Yan's mausoleum was burned down, and his tomb was excavated. The burial site of Cang Jie, the legendary inventor of Chinese characters, was also destroyed and turned into a martyr cemetery. 2. Confucius's grave, once revered as the resting place of the teacher of all ages, was leveled, his tomb excavated, and his grand memorial stele shattered. The steles throughout the Confucian temple were destroyed, and the clay statues inside were smashed to pieces. 3. In Tangying County, Henan, the hometown of the Chinese national hero Yue Fei, the Red Guards destroyed statues of him and other historical figures, along with cast iron kneeling statues of traitors like Qin Hui. They also wiped out centuries-old stone inscriptions. In Hangzhou, they went even further, smashing Yue Fei's shrine and digging up his grave, ultimately scattering his remains. 4. Hai Rui, a Ming Dynasty official known for his integrity, was granted an imperial burial by Emperor Wanli after his death. In 1966, during the Four Olds campaign, the Red Guards toppled his tombstone and other stone inscriptions, then dug up his grave and paraded his remains throughout the streets with a mock tall hat before burning them. 5. That same year, the Dingling Mausoleum within the Ming tombs was looted by the Red Guards. The remains of Emperor Wanli and his 2 empresses were dragged into the public square, surrounded by portraits and objects deemed evidence of crimes. Officials organized a public denunciation session, where people shouted, "Down with the royalists," before throwing stones at the bones. Finally, the remains were set on fire. 6. Wu Xun, known as the Eternal Righteous Beggar, was a celebrated educator from the Qing dynasty. He never married or owned property, instead using decades of alms to establish free schools. His efforts were recognized globally, and he was honored as a silent educator and the people's educator in the World Education Dictionary. Over 30 years, he founded 3 schools, purchased more than 5 acres of land to fund education, and amassed a fortune dedicated to schooling, an achievement unparalleled in world education history. However, in 1951, the film Wu Xun's biography was politically condemned, and during the Cultural Revolution, Red Guards, under the guidance of teachers, dug up his grave, removed his remains, and paraded them through the streets. They publicly denounced him and then burned his bones to ashes. These cases are just a few examples of the countless times the Chinese Communist Party has desecrated traditional culture and dishonored ancestors. Traditional Chinese culture emphasizes respecting the deceased and remembering one's ancestors. Ancestral graves are not only a person's spiritual root, but also a place of remembrance and belonging. They should never be violated or desecrated. Digging up graves is an act of extreme hatred, an outright curse on both the deceased and their family. The irony is that decades ago, the CCP commanded the Red Guards to destroy Confucius's grave. Yet now it spends billions of dollars establishing Confucius Institutes worldwide, using his name to infiltrate Western culture and influence foreign politicians. This is yet another insult to Confucius. As China's economy continues to decline and the real estate market nears collapse, the funeral industry has become one of the last ways for the CCP to extract money from the people. One person lamented, "In China, people struggle to be born, struggle to raise children, and struggle just to survive. And when they die, they can't even afford to rest in peace. As long as the CCP exists, even in death, it won't let you go. Now, even burial is a luxury that Chinese people can't afford."